Cossacks 3 is more or less a remaster of the original game. It does away with many of the changes that were found in Cossacks 2 and focuses on the kind of gameplay that was found in Cossacks 1 and American Conquest. In traditional RTS format, you'll be collecting resources to build a base, to then build units, to then crush your enemy with your own army. Cossacks 3 leans more on the casual side over the competitiveness of games like StarCraft. It's a more slow-paced game, with units taking lines and firing on each other and taking time to perform their actions such as reloading. There's not as much micro to do, however that doesn't mean that the game lacks skill or depth at all. There's a ton to do in this game. It relies a lot on positioning, much more than other games. You'll have to position your cavalry, your pikemen, your musketmen, your cannons in the right spot to make sure they don't get taken out. And one of the more interesting changes from traditional RTS games is that this game has a resource called coal, which is used every time you fire a shot. Meaning if you have musketmen taking shots, or cannons shooting, or frigates shooting from the seas, it uses up coal every time it shoots. So you have to very carefully think about how you're engaging, otherwise you might eat up all your resources and not do any damage at all. And this puts a really big emphasis on protecting your mines, where you can get coal to make sure that the enemy doesn't raid them or destroy them or kill the workers that you have. It also means that you need to think really carefully about when you're using the large damage dealers like ships or artillery, because each shot that you take uses a ton of coal. There's a ton of different resources in this game, like wood, stone, coal, iron, and gold. And probably one of the more interesting ones is food, which basically has a maintenance fee onto it for all your units. And if you run out of food, you then begin to have a famine and then your units will die. Which means that if somebody's raiding your farms, you can have a really bad time. There's also a ton of different buildings to place in this game. You've got things like chapels to heal your units, diplomatic centers for hiring mercenaries, barracks, stables, artillery depots, academies for research, docks for shipping, and so forth. One area where the game does fall short a little bit is in the AI. It doesn't offer the greatest of challenge, and it kind of just throws hordes of units at you with no real idea of tactics at all, which can make it kind of easy when you're using things like cannons and so forth to just obliterate units. They also don't really take advantage of all the tech tree in this game. They don't use as many different units as you have options to, and they don't really use the regiments that you can basically create either. You can basically group together units in sort of old school style battalions where you have like 100 men in a group with an officer and a drummer and everything marching together and firing at the same time and everything. Instead, they just sort of basically lump everything together and just throw. Graphically, Cossacks 3 is a massive improvement over the original game, with a hybrid of 2D backgrounds with 3D units. It looks nice, but it's not going to win any awards either. But it does look very well when it comes to things like ships, water, the units. They all look very detailed. The multiplayer is unfortunately rather dead at this time. It takes an incredibly long time to find a game, and you're probably pretty unlikely to really get into a game unless you want to spend a lot of time waiting. Where most people probably spend the most of their time in this game is in either the campaign or the skirmish mode. There is a ton of options in skirmish for how you want to set up the game and how you want it to play out. The campaign of Cossacks 3 is a mixed bag. Some of it is decent, but most of it is pretty boring. It's kind of just strung together. You get basically a massive wall of text at the beginning of each mission and throughout the mission that outline the story and what's going on and what your objectives are. It tries to throw in historical stuff, but it's really not that historical. There is a pretty decent amount of missions, but as I mentioned before, they're kind of boring. A lot of times you're basically just marching armies from one area to another to get to one fort to siege it, or there was a mission in particular where I had to control a fleet of ships and move them around to different ports, and it took a couple minutes to move them from each port to the next, and it was just really boring sitting there and watching ships basically sail until eventually we finally sieged something. Now, overall, Cossacks 3 is a fun game, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're looking for a fast-paced competitive RTS. It's just really slow and won't really meet that fast-paced competitive need. But if you're looking for something a little bit more casual or maybe a little bit slower, this is probably your game. You've got decent graphics with fun gameplay, but if you played Cossacks 1 or American Conquest, then you're not really missing a whole lot in this game. And if you're looking for a remaster, then sure, pick this game up. If you're looking for something a little bit more, then you're probably going to find yourself to be pretty disappointed, and I wouldn't recommend it. Overall, Cossacks 3 gets a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty fun game that has a decent price point for what it is. If it was priced any more, I would drop this game down to a 6, but at $20, it's pretty reasonable.